It is the end of August of 2024. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Vasa, and right before starting recording this podcast, we have been on the town square having a cup of coffee and enjoying the last of the summer of this year. My name is Joachim Jocke Finnholm, and this is the Invisible Cities podcast.
And my name is Annelie Holmström.
And I'm Toni Brell.
Okay, Toni, so this is the first time that we're meeting you. It would be good for us and everybody, perhaps, if you could introduce a little bit about maybe not even your practice to start off with, but just perhaps even your journey from theatre to visual arts, because as I understood, you first studied theatre and then you moved into the visual arts. So it'd be interesting just to hear a bit about that journey first.
Yeah, of course. Yes, I grew up actually in a theatre family, so it felt kind of intuitive at first to study theatre. And what that means, more precisely, I studied dramaturgy and storytelling, and then ended up working for different theatres after that, as a dramaturg. That was all in Germany, so I'm German. And I was rather young, I would say, when I went right from school to studying theatre, and then worked also while I was studying at theatres already, and then had my first positions as a dramaturg.
Could I just ask a stupid question?
Yeah, of course.
What is a dramaturg?
A dramaturg is, in German theatre systems, and I'm also specifically speaking about the state theatres, because there's also a free scene where it might be a bit different. But at the theatres where I worked at the time, so that was around 2009, 2010, and a bit after that, a dramaturg would be someone who works closely with the production, but who is also on the administrative side of theatre and sort of bridges that side with the productions, with the directors, and also with the actors, and sort of is the person who brings in the conceptual frame and thinking of the theatre and bridges that with the production. So it's a very text-based process, I would say, and it's really about finding concepts, finding the critical direction of the theatre. But yeah, I was quite young when I first did that, and for me, it was really overwhelming to be in that position at the time so early, because I was, I think, 22 when I had my first position. And it is also very often in theatre sort of a leading position. I was, however, working at quite small theatres, so it was kind of an entry point. Mm-hmm. And then, because that was a lot at the time, I decided to sort of take a step back at one point. But it also is really very much tied to the, I would say, rather strict and maybe even patriarchal structures that I found at the theatres where I worked. So for me, that was something that I didn't have the tools to deal with.
Okay.
So I took a step back and decided to study again after that. And at first I studied visual communication before I then went into fine arts. And for me, it was also a way of kind of bridging a passion that I had for a more visual engagement, because, as I said, like the dramaturgy was a really text-based engagement. And so I decided to go into design at first, and from there, found my way into fine arts.
What was the bridge to fine arts for you?
Yeah, interestingly, performance, which is also how I still work. So in a sense, I found my way back to theatre, I would say, or finding that way of working through performative engagement. When I worked in design, which was also not for very long, I think one of the things that I found really confusing is that you create these worlds that sometimes to me felt very unlivable in a sense. So what I had a desire to do is to make things that I found livable again. And so I started to work with that in a physical way with my own designs, and through that found my way to performance.
What do you mean by unlivable? Do you mean that it's like a separate world, like outside of like reality, or what do you mean by? Like?
I think that was very specific to the way I designed, to be honest. I worked a lot with text and with black and white graphics. So I worked mostly in graphic design at first, or studied that, and it was a strange world that was very preoccupied with aesthetics, and with aesthetics that were also speaking for themselves. And while I really was interested in mastering these aesthetics and mastering the way to work with visuals, I kind of felt like something was left out in that process, if that makes sense, or more sense.
I'm just wondering because I read a little bit about how you've involved collaboration or like this sort of involving others in the work, and I wondered if that was, I suppose, with design, it's not that kind of collaboration, or is it different compared to performances that you've been doing, for instance?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think that's also part of it. The collaboration in design, design is inherently collaborative, of course, similar to theatre, I would say, but it's indeed a bit different, as you would usually work for a client who approaches you with a very specific question. So it's less about creating work together, even though design definitely in this day and age has changed quite a bit, and many designers are moving in that direction, that it is more inherently collaborative, the working process. Which is, I think, also where I started to depart. But then, it led me somewhere else.
So when you were studying at the visual arts program, where was it you were studying that?
I was studying at Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam, so that was a master's. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was your master's thesis like, kind of focusing on?
Well, at Sandberg, we have a theoretical thesis and sort of a practical work. However, I graduated in the Corona time. So we actually had two graduations, in a sense. We had one informal graduation show where I presented one work, and then that was supposed to evolve into another work for the formal graduation. But in the meantime, my dad passed away, and that overshadowed everything. And so my final graduation work was very much about his passing. But so I also had my thesis, which is maybe more to your question, and that was a script or a theatre piece, in a sense. And it evolved around female and or non-binary storytelling, I would say. But it's maybe, that's maybe the frame, but it was really a piece following characters. And that was maybe the initial question I had at the time writing that, the question of how to write something from a female and or non-binary standpoint.
Was there multiple characters, or was there...
Yeah, there were multiple characters that... I also have to remember it. I graduated in 2021, so it's not that far away, but I haven't revisited that piece for a while. But it is... It was one main character, and I think maybe 2 or 3 characters, and they were friends. I was really interested in the question of writing a script that's conversational, sort of to moving through a topic or a theme through conversation, which I think is also still reverberating in the work that I'm doing now, that where I'm very interested in collaborative approaches. And I think it was a way for me to think through that in a time where collaboration was really hard to do because we were quite isolated from each other, at least during the masters. I mean, it had already opened up a little bit when I graduated, but it was a very lonely time. And I think it was a longing for that, writing these characters.
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, it kind of makes sense that, or perhaps that collaboration is on your mind when, it's something really kind of
much
taken away.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you're saying that it's kind of strange looking back on that period now. So has your creative process changed in terms of how you make work, or is it quite project dependent? I know you work with lots of other people, so I wonder how much that affects the way that you might approach a project.
Mm-hmm. I would say it has definitely changed a lot. I think the very collaborative form in which I work now, and also the embracing of performative work, has sort of actually happened after the graduation more than before. And that, well, again, I think it has a lot to do with the pandemic. not allowing for this sort of work, or me at least not being able to find a way into it. Also, Sandberg, of course, is not a school that it wasn't a performance course. But afterwards, I moved more into a performance-based network, and that is inherently collaborative and also quite freeing in that.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you're working on just now, just to give a bit of a picture of your working process and what's presently on your mind.
Yeah. So I'm now currently artist in residence at Platform for 2 more weeks. I've been here for, I think about 2 months now, not quite. And I'm incredibly grateful and happy that I could be here and really find the time to develop something more deeply. I've been working on something that is a continuation of the work I've done before the residency. And I think for the past, I would say 2 years, I've been really interested in sensory engagement in the arts. So specifically bringing sensory engagement directly to an audience. And also doing that with a focus on sound, but sort of opening sound up to other senses, I would say. And here at Platform, I've been reading a lot. It was really good to read and write and sort of conceptualize the work that I've been doing in the past years, because there barely was any space to do that. And but quite concretely, after writing and reading, I've been starting to develop a new-ish performance, I would say. And for that, I've been working with ceramics, and I've been making ceramics flutes, which has been a long-held dream to elaborate on that. Because I have been working with ceramics quite a bit before that as well, but somehow it wasn't the main point of interest for a while. And so what I'm hoping to do for this performance that will happen on August 30 here in Vasa is to invite the audience to to use the flutes with me and create a sound piece together with me, amongst other things. So for me, when I speak about performance, also audience interaction is quite important, but also doing this in a way that is sensible and respectful, because I have absolutely no interest in provocation or making people feel uncomfortable, which I think is often what people think about when they think about audience interaction. But for me, it's quite the contrary. So I'm trying to find a space that is somewhere between something that is open and invites the audience to interact with me, but also something where I give enough guidance for them to feel safe in a way. And it's still something I'm figuring out how to do that. Also for myself, to do something where I don't overstretch my own boundaries towards the audience. And sometimes it works better and sometimes it works less well. And in the last iterations, I moved a little bit towards doing something that's rather closed, where there was less and less interaction. And I want to open that up again a bit more while I'm here.
Have you made the clay flutes yet? And they didn't. They turned out all right.
Well, they're not quite done yet. They still have to be fired and glazed. But yes, they are done. They are waiting in the studio to be fired on Monday. Yeah, which is of course in and of itself a really beautiful work that I enjoyed a lot.
The process of making them, or
yes, the process of working with clay in itself is very meditative and calming, and very sensory.
Is it often that you use props in performances?
Yes.
And how is that like an equally important part of the making of the prop, and in terms of how the idea is formed?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a good observation that I think I'm also still starting. I'm still digesting in a way. But yes, the props are really important. I'm also really more seeing the things I'm working with as props or scenography rather than installation. Even though I like things to remain in a space after I'm gone as well. But yes, the props are quite important, and I'm not just working with things that I'm making myself, but also importantly with things that I find both actively and sort of things that maybe just happen to be there, which for me is a way of, for one, it's a way of connecting with a place that I'm in, but it's also a way to sort of bring in different aesthetics, and that's something I'm quite interested in. So, for instance, I think that with the ceramics flutes, I'm hoping to, I haven't found everything that I want to add yet, but I'm quite interested in sort of mingling in trash and materials that maybe aren't as wholesome as the ceramic flutes, because for me there is something interesting in bridging these different worlds, something that's handmade and crafted, and there's a lot of love put into it, and things that are made in a serial way, where maybe they just usually have a use case that's less interesting or less artistic. So yeah, I'm still looking for trash, but I'm also, importantly, many of the objects that I'm using for creating sound. So that's also something that's really interesting or important for me. And indeed, like, I'm testing many of the objects also for the sound quality, even though what is probably important to know is that I amplify them so they can really be very quiet.
Yeah, I was also reading somewhere that you're quite interested in ASMR
Right.
as perhaps you could maybe explain a little bit about that and what it is and how it relates to your practice.
Yes, I'm interested in ASMR practices and also Foley practices, and I usually say these two together, so maybe I can speak about both of them. Yeah. The ASMR is a practice that I believe was popularized on YouTube. It stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, and it's not really a practice that's based on something that's actually scientific. However, the idea is that it triggers the same pathways that acupuncture triggers for you. But I think I'm actually more interested in the sort of creepy element of ASMR than the healing element of it. I don't know, some people might be familiar with ASMR videos on YouTube. It's often people speaking very quietly into a microphone, and you can hear their mouth movement or tongue movement, and then they use their nails to sort of scratch an object or make very subtle sounds with it. And there's definitely also an overlaps, often going into something erotic. And there's also some ASMR performers, I don't know if they would call themselves that, but on YouTube, who really like very actively go into a kind of a creepy niche. And I don't mean in a sexual way, but just creating really strange characters. And that's something I'm very interested in, the strangeness of that, because I'm always interested in this tension between something that's weird and strange and maybe uncanny in some form, and something that's at the same time wholesome. But I don't want to go into just one direction. And then the other thing, Foley, is a practice that is used it's a post-production practice in movies where sound effects are amplified after the fact. So often what we see on screen or what we hear on screen basically is not really what we see. So one of the famous examples of Foley is that horse hooves, running horses, are amplified, for instance, by people using coconuts. So that's that's just one of the very famous examples. So in fact, we see the horse, but we hear coconuts. But our brain brings these two together, and we think it's one thing. And I find that very fascinating. There is another thing about Foley that I really love is when you look at I've never been to a Foley studio. It's something I really still want to do. But when you find them online, pictures or videos of Foley artists, they have these incredibly messy studios with a lot of props lying around, and it almost more looks like a messy, a messy playing around. And then there's microphones and tech everywhere, and I really love this aesthetically.
I think the Foley artists are probably the most happy people in the cinema business.
I really think so.
Yeah. They get to play around and they are, yeah.
No, absolutely. It's also definitely like in the back of my mind a plan B. Although it would maybe take some time to establish myself. Maybe I can make Foley for really weird video art or something. Yeah, but exactly. It just is so joyful in many ways. And there's a lot of fantasy in there. And I think the way that some people have perfected this and also really built these strange collections of objects, they're very personal as well. Of course, there are some things that people use interchangeably in Foley, but every Foley artist, as I understand it, really has their own craft and their own like special objects that they use for specific things.
What I liked about the example you gave with the horse hooves is that, like, if you were to actually record horse hooves, it would probably sound less like horse hooves than the coconut sounds. You know, it's kind of like, maybe it's a bit like that thing with. I mean, I'm a painter, so I kind of think about this in terms of like that you abstract something and you make it even more, or you push, like, you know, exaggerating a certain aspect, and maybe Foley is like kind of like the sound equivalent of
absolutely
like, turning something up.
Yeah, try to make it more than the real sound somehow.
Yeah, I think another good example for that you might be familiar without having thought about it is if you look at nature documentaries these days, they have like really incredible detailed sounds that never could be heard, or even they're probably just entirely fictional. If you hear sort of plants growing and then there's a sound that is just not there. But this is also something that I find very inspiring, these kind of almost fictional sounds. So when I say I work with Foley, or it's more that I'm inspired by that. I'm more inspired by these the fictional sound effects and generally speaking, just using objects to create sounds that you maybe open up a different world. That is something I find quite interesting.
Yeah, and I like it in older movies or like B movies when they don't put in maybe all of the sounds. It creates this weird dreamlike atmosphere over it. Some sounds are missing and some sounds are there, and that makes it really interesting for me. Actually, I enjoy it.
Yeah, that's also a really good point. To working with that. Yeah.
Talking about inspirations, you said that you were reading a lot here. Is there any, what books did you bring with you? Is there anything that comes off the top of your head?
Yeah. I've read, I've cross-read a few things. I wonder if I want to give references, not just because not everything I read was great. I read one of the books I read coming here was David Abram's Spell of the Senses, I believe it's called. It's a book that's, for instance, one of the books I've read with a bit of care, I would say, or like it was really interesting and very beautiful to read. David Abrams, as I understand it, is a scholar, but also how do you say in English? A doctor, I guess. I might be wrong here. I should double check it. But also he describes himself as a sleight of hand magician. Is that the word?
Yeah.
And he went, I believe, to Indonesia to live with native peoples there, and sort of looked at the way that medicine is intertwined with magic there, and sort of reflected on that. And while I think that some of this is definitely, looking at it today, I believe he wrote it maybe in the 90s. I should really double check these things. Some of these things might be, a bit problematic to read today. There's definitely something there that I loved, in specific, the way that he describes, the sensory engagement with the world around him, and sort of the way that he understands sensory engagement as a form of magic. So that was quite beautiful to read in some way coming here.
So when you're talking about sensory engagement with your work, is it mainly touch that you're interested in, or is there other kind of senses that? I mean, obviously sound, as you said.
Yes, it's at the moment it's mostly touch and sound because these two also work together. Because I produce the sound that I work with through touch. There is definitely an interest in working with other senses like smell and taste. And I should mention that I began this journey as an artist as part of a collective. We also still work together. We're called Brackish. And in that collective, it's my friend and colleague Lila Bullen-Smith who worked the most with sound and with taste and smell. Mm-hmm. So it's really nice in that sense to have someone else who works with these things while I was able to focus on sound, especially in the last works. But I definitely am also interested in that in my solo work, but I think a bit different than what Lila brings in. I'm not a cook myself, and I'm not really interested so much into cooking or crafting beautiful, edible work, but I'm personally quite interested in maybe tastes that aren't so nice necessarily, or tastes that bring in memories. So, for instance, I worked with Chupa Chups lollipops in one performance, which is just, for me, it brings up such memories, and they're really not very good tasting, I must say.
What are these lollipops? Like ice lollipops, or?
No, they're just like sugary in all kinds of flavors, and we had them when I was a kid. Probably they definitely still exist because I had them, but I'm not sure how much people still love them, but they were very omnipresent in my childhood. So I used them for a performance where I sort of conjured childhood memories without specifically speaking about my childhood, but sort of the universal 90s childhood in Germany, the universal West Germany, I should say. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's funny. I have also like memories to my childhood from some taste. It's an artificial pineapple taste. It's difficult to find, and I don't know from where it is in my childhood. I think it's from some candy when we used to go to Sweden. It brings it back, but yeah, it's difficult to find in food. I know there's like a certain frozen pizza that has this artificial pineapple. So if I want that feeling of my childhood, I can always eat that and I get that cake. Like, okay, that was the taste.
That's quite, like, I really find this quite brilliant. These like artificial, and I want to say gross tastes. I don't know what that tasted like, but for me, there's definitely like really strange artificial tastes that I find so interesting, how they have ingrained themselves into my memory. And maybe more so than like the taste of an apple, maybe because that's just still very like very omnipresent, or it's more often these like fake tastes that I remember, and it's I find that interesting and strange, like how these sorry. I find it interesting how these strange artificial tastes have ingrained themselves into our brains, and sort of in some way become part of our stories. So that's why I like to conjure them. But there's also a side there that is fascinating on a different level, which I haven't looked in so much. That's again more, that would be my friend Lila. She's done work around that, the way that these tastes are produced these days, and of course the big machinery that is behind that. I find that also super fascinating, that we even want that.
Yeah, and I find it here a connection to the Foley also, because with the Foley we try to create sounds that are more real than the real sounds. And with these tastes, they don't taste like real, but they become these hyper tastes of these things, like banana yogurt. It doesn't really taste like banana.
Yeah, exactly. That's, I think, for me also where I find the connection. And yeah, again, like I think with all of this, I'm rather more interested in the creepy and strange, and maybe not so wholesome. I kind of need to find a better word to describe something positive that's not so wholesome. But for now, I'm saying that. But yes, the artificial things that are also often in relation to nature in some way, because that's definitely something that's preoccupied me, sort of my relationship to nature and my relationship to landscape. And maybe here's another element that, tying it back to theatre, might be interesting and that it's in my brain a lot is the fact that oftentimes, or in the past, theatre used these fake landscapes. And while I don't think it's a very common practice in most theatre pieces nowadays, it was quite prevalent for me when I was a child because, my dad was an opera singer. And he actually did many of the things I saw where he was in, still had these sort of artificial landscapes in them. And he also used to bring them home to us. So my parents bought an old farm somewhere in the countryside. But they weren't farmers. They both came from the city. So we had a really strange upbringing. And he would bring these, what's the word? Like it's Kulisse in German. It's, backdrops, theater backdrops. Yeah. And so we had in our garden, which was quite large, different theater backdrops standing around. It's not a garden, sorry. It was a wild lawn. Anyways, it was a really strange mix of things. And for me...
what kind of scenes were they? I'm just
different ones. Really cheesy. Some that are very problematic. I don't want to speak about it. But we also, for one thing, for instance, that we had was like blue styrofoam horses. Really like in like horse size. I believe they came from a production of Cinderella or something. I'm not quite sure. But stuff like that really has a lasting influence on me. And also the fact that I did grow up in the countryside and yet really wasn't embedded there very much because my parents came from the city. And so I think also in this understanding of what nature is, it's quite related to this interest in Foley and the fake tastes and that sort of way of understanding something.
Well, it's interesting when thinking about nature as something wholesome. I suppose, for the lack of the better word for what you're talking about.
Is
it just
grateful
like
if you could bring one?
when human beings haven't involved themselves, that's the. But I know even with, like, for instance, the clay flutes that you were talking about, that's a material it's so old and it's a very raw material. It's not something that's been processed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also a very like old craft, I find it really good to connect with that in some way, but I also find it important for myself, anyways, to move away from that a little bit or to sort of confine it through other objects and other things.
I mean, I know that for myself, like I really enjoy a lot of folk art, for instance.
What was that?
Folk art, like art that has a history and kind of folk art.
Yes.
But obviously it's very nostalgic too. And things that are nostalgic often have this sort of maybe ignoring the contemporary world or something.
Yeah. But I think this is a super important word for me as well, nostalgia, that you're, so I'm glad you brought it up. Because I think I'm definitely struggling with that, with nostalgia. I think I have quite some nostalgia for a place that maybe I was never really part of in some way. But at the same time, I also think that nostalgia is at the heart of many very difficult discourses, such as the raising fascism at the moment or right-wing movements, and also their perception of nature, for instance. But I think it's undeniable that that many of us feel some form of nostalgia for things that we already have lost maybe or are about to lose, in specific also with we all know that the climate emergency is a real thing. So, I mean, I think in this room we know it. And so, of course, there's nostalgia for that as well. And for maybe a time where I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, I guess, nostalgia can perhaps be dangerous when it makes us not confront reality or, difficult things. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, there's definitely a question of how can I allow that feeling, that maybe mourning of something, which is, I think, valid to feel nostalgic or to feel a certain sadness. How can I allow for that, but still be aware and mindful of the reality that I live in, and not just try to turn back and ignore that fully. So I think the mixing of these different aesthetics for me is sort of a gateway into trying to allow for the one while acknowledging the other.
Yeah, I guess like you were talking about these weird territories where, you know, it's not one thing or the other, but it's like, you know, kind of the gray zone between two things.
Yep.
Or
Yeah, and also maybe trying to find a way of allowing for nostalgia in weirdness. I think that's maybe, kind of at the core of it.
To go back a little bit to something that you said earlier about involving others in the performances and trying to create a space that where everyone feels comfortable to participate, or have you found any like good strategies for that, like ways of?
I definitely have found some strategies. I don't know if they're the best or the only ones, but for me, what I'm noticing is that, in fact, like the less performative something is, I think that also is quite easy, quite easy to understand. That the less performative I am or the situation is, the easier it is to approach people. And on the other hand, the more I have planned, it becomes harder to approach people. And that really, even like, for instance, having a dark space makes it harder. It's very simple things, you know, but that I still have to move through myself to sort of like see it, even if it kind of is, it should be clear. I think it even goes as far as things like the more I wear a costume, the harder it becomes to approach someone, and stuff like that. And I'm really grappling with that because I like to wear costumes and I like to have immersive scenes. But yeah, maybe that's actually a good word. The more immersive something seems to be, the harder it becomes to approach people. And I might just have to accept that, but I'm still searching for ways of having immersive atmospheres while I can still approach people. Maybe that's,
That's interesting, yeah.
So in some of the works we did with Brackish, we phrased it more as a workshop, for instance, even though we had a really clear script of what we were saying even. But even the framing of a workshop makes it quite different. And of course, people knowing from the get-go what they're getting into and if this is interactive or not.
Maybe framing something as a workshop is also a good, a good way.
Indeed. And then people are prepared for, interacting in some way. And generally speaking, I think it definitely helps if I make myself available as a person. And not as a character in a sense. So that's definitely something that I'm also grappling with, because at the same time, the more I am a character, the easier it becomes for me to hold, to guide the performance. And the more I become vulnerable, it becomes harder for me. But the more vulnerable I am, the more people are on board with interacting. So yeah, I think I've not really found the way, but that's also okay. It doesn't always have to be open. It's more that I'm interested in trying out these different gateways into a performance.
Have you got it? Have you got it kind of set what the performance that you'll do coming up is going to look like, or perhaps you don't want to say too much about it?
I have ish. No, I don't have the flutes yet, so okay. I really have to figure that out. But I know that I will work in a similar way to how I've worked in past performances, in creating sound pieces and working with text as well. So I have a rough idea, but I need to set it up, basically. I think for me, it always is so reliant on the objects that I work with, that it's kind of hard to do it before I can try it out in a space with the objects. So in the next week I'll work on that.
I also read somewhere that that you work partly scripted and some of it is unscripted. Is that like Yeah, I suppose it's like you said just now that you have you have a sort of a structure in your head, and then like is the unscripted part guided by the props, or how does it work?
Often it is, or the unscripted part is usually the part where I interact directly with the audience. Although I would also like to open other parts up more. But it certainly is the interaction, because I need to be open to whatever happens with an audience. Of course, there's some form of guidance there as well. But yes, so when I say interaction with the audience, maybe it's good to unpack that a little bit. I in the recent iterations, most of the time it had to do with sort of creating some form of direct sensory experience, usually with sound or smell or taste. Well, that's almost all the senses, but yeah, sort of close to someone. So it also becomes, in some sense, an isolated experience that is for one person in that moment. But of course, or I believe that others still participate, sort of through watching that in some way. But these moments, I try to be rather open. However, in the last performance I did, these were actually quite confined as well, in the sense that I had a plan for what I say to people and wasn't that open to what they would do. And it was interesting that really also led to people being closed off in some ways, but not all of them. Yeah.
Interesting.
The afternoon has changed to late afternoon, and I guess the town square here in Vasa is now filled, or the cafes and pubs there are filled with people that wants to have their beer, because it's a really nice late summer day today. Thank you very much to our guest for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for listening to the podcast. I am Joakim Jukki Finnholm.
I'm Anneli Holmström.
I'm Toni Brell.